Hey, quick note before the podcast. We're testing out some video content. So make sure you search Joe Momoh Presents on YouTube or go to the link in the description. Let me know what you guys think. All right, take care. Bye. Hey, what's up, podcast family? This week I talked to Kevin Dahl. Kevin is a co-founder at EvryWork and advisor at Platform Calgary. His background is peppered with senior roles in community building, ecosystem development, marketing, business development, sales, and HR. Kevin has expertise in several industries, including mobile payments, hospitality tech, telecommunications, music, and tech incubation. On the podcast, we talk about the do's and don'ts of entrepreneurship, the future of Calgary's startup ecosystem, common myths and misconceptions about building a business, and much, much more. Remember to rate and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. You get awesome local leaders and entrepreneur stories each week, jam-packed with their unique insights. Leave me feedback at joe@codesta.io on some of the stories or questions you want to hear. I read them all. Now to the podcast. Hope you guys enjoy. And we are live. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. Obviously, you're big into the entrepreneurship ecosystem here in Calgary. You're actually a co-founder yourself with EvryWork. But before we jump into all that, perhaps give us a little backstory of who you are and what you're up to.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a former Sasky. I'm born and raised in Saskatchewan. I moved out here about 3.5 years after graduating from the U of S. That 3.5 years after graduating, I jumped right into a startup in Saskatoon, and then made my way west after things wrapped up there. Basically, in terms of my roles, I've always kind of been in and around the entrepreneur ecosystem, either as a founder or as a supporter, or like working with a community organization. And yeah, I guess in terms of companies, here in Calgary, I've most recently I have my own startup, EvryWork. Prior to that, I worked for an organization called Robots and Pencils, where we were building apps and technologies for Fortune 500 companies. Prior to that, worked a company called Ethor. It was a startup. Worked with Gary and the team there for several years, and I guess yeah, my current role, like I said, I'm a co-founder of EvryWork, but due to COVID, that's kind of on pause right now. But I am sort of my full-time day job working with an organization called Platform Calgary, where I'm an advisor. And what we do there is work with the startup community here in Calgary to help grow it, help work with founders, and to, I guess the big, hairy, audacious goal, or the BHAG, is really to help grow the community and diversify the economy here in Calgary.
That's awesome. Just quickly step back. You mentioned you joined a startup right after graduating U of S. Have you always had a knack for entrepreneurship growing as a kid? Were you the type to sell lemonade at lemonade stands and all that? Or how'd you kind of get into the entrepreneurship space?
Yeah, it's funny because my parents are not entrepreneurs. My mom was a hairdresser, my dad worked in auto body, and they kind of had, very few job changes throughout, my childhood. So I don't know where I got it, but I was that kid. Me and my brothers would have, lemonade stands. I got my first paper route when I was like 12, and I kind of got that itch from somewhere. I don't know where, but it started out early. And yeah, when I was going through university, I was looking, at that time, a lot of the people I was going to school with were getting jobs for big accounting firms or big financial firms here in Calgary, and moving away from Saskatoon. And I just didn't want any of that. I had a friend who, his dad had started a tech startup, building software for the restaurant industry. And I was like, what, that sounds really cool. I kind of like that. Let's try that out. And so that's kind of where I jumped right in. And haven't really looked back. I've worked in some organizations, like while I was in university, I did work for the Bank of Nova Scotia for a while, but I always knew like that wasn't that I could have went right in and gotten a job with the bank. I'd been there for a couple of years while I was in university, but to me, it's just I've always been drawn towards doing something where I'm kind of more in control of my own destiny.
Absolutely. And you being part of Platform Calgary, I love that. Your the organization in general, I guess, is putting more light on the entrepreneurship community here in Calgary. I feel like we have a sneaky, vibrant entrepreneurship space here in Calgary, and it's awesome that the organization is kind of putting a light on that.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Like, kind of we've got this small but mighty community that's been growing, and more, I think we just need to shine the light on it. I think there's a lot of, Albertans who are in the tech community who kind of know about it. I describe it as like they're inside the bubble. But the challenge is if you're not inside the bubble, you might not even know the bubble exists. And so I think through a variety of the different things that we're doing at Platform, we're helping to expose that to Calgarians and Albertans in general, and showing people that hey, there is a community here, and there's a lot of supports. It's not just Platform. There's a ton of other support organizations for entrepreneurs, for founders, and given some of the economic situation that we've been going through, plus COVID, those entrepreneurs who have always had a job maybe are now thinking, hey, I've been laid off for the last little while. Maybe it's time to start my own thing. And if we can help them find the community and connect with the community, then I think we're doing something really important.
Absolutely. Speaking of COVID, I wanted to ask you, Kevin, what's kind of been the most challenging part of this whole quote unquote new normal for you personally?
Well, I'm a very sort of social guy, and I really enjoyed and throughout my career, kind of I really loved meeting new people and socializing. I wouldn't say I'm like a power networker. I'm not one of those people that just loves to bounce around and at the end of the night I've got 100 new business cards of people I've met. But I just enjoy meeting people and understanding a little bit more about them, what they're up to, hearing about their business or their idea or whatever it may be. And I think for me, that's been really tough with COVID is not being able to do that. There's a group organization called Startup Calgary here in town, and they do startup drinks once a month. I used to love going there. It's casual. You can grab a pint and just meet people, and that's really hard to replicate virtually. We tried at Platform, and I think we got people together and had some conversations, but it's not the same as meeting someone in person.
Absolutely. It's almost that Zoom fatigue is not going to be the same as meeting face to face.
It's real. It's real. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'm sure you've been in contact with many entrepreneurs and startup businesses here in Calgary. Not to put you on the spot, Kevin, but I'm curious, what's kind of your favorites, or even one that really impressed you? It could be a startup, or it could be an entrepreneur in general.
Oh, an individual. I have to pick somebody, do I? No, and I'm not just saying this, but it really is tough because there's so many really cool things happening. Um, I guess, one of the things that, or I guess one of the organizations or groups of people that I would point out that I think are really doing game changing things here in town are the people behind Thin Air Labs. So there's kind of the three main guys, Jim, James, and Greg, but really there's a whole team behind them as well. But what they're doing is they're really looking at the everything that's happening in society, in the tech sector, in the energy and traditional sectors, and saying how can we reimagine or re-envision what society is, and how can we make it more regenerative and more better for society in general. And so people like Jim Gibson have written some fantastic articles, and Jim actually wrote a book about tip of the spear and how we as society can adapt to these changes that are being brought about by technology, and not just adapt but thrive and be better. And so I really in terms of just people that I admire and people that are really thinking big and thinking about how we can make this place better future generations. I really respect what those guys are doing.
Mhm. I'm curious to get your perspective, Kevin. What's you mentioned you moved from U of S 3.5 years from graduating to Calgary. But how's Calgary changed from your perspective from when you first got here to where it is today?
Yeah, well, that was, not to date myself, but I've been here in Calgary now for about 15 years. So you can do the math and figure out how long ago it was when I moved here. When I first moved here, the first couple of years, I didn't tap into the tech scene in Calgary. I had been part of it, the tech startup scene in Saskatoon. But when I came here, it was all about, just trying to figure out a new path and make some connections and build my network. I eventually did connect with the community a couple of years after I got here. And, I think the biggest things that I would say that have changed is really, the community itself. It's grown, but not that much. Like, we're not talking like 10 or 20 or 100 times what it was, 13 years ago. It definitely has grown a little bit, but I think the big thing that has changed is around like the community itself. So, like I said, we haven't grown that much. So it's not that the community has quadrupled in size or anything like that, but the community used to be a lot more, stay off my turf. I'm doing my thing over here. You do your thing over there, and we'll all just coexist. Whereas now the community really comes together, works together. We rally around successes, and that's both companies and organizations like Platform that support founders and startups. So getting away from this mindset of scarcity to this mindset of abundance, and how can we all come together to support startups in Calgary? I think that has really changed. And then I think the other big thing that I've noticed is just inclusivity and the inclusiveness of the community. 10, 15 years ago, I mean, I'm a middle-aged white guy, but 10, 15 years ago, the whole startup community was middle-aged white guys. And so that, has changed quite a bit now. I mean, we still have a long way to go. I mean, we're not, by no means can we like check a box to say that we're perfectly inclusive. But I think definitely now the community and people in it recognize the need for, gender equality. We recognize the need to create and eliminate barriers for some of the underrepresented, founder groups, whether it's ethnicity or LGBTQ or whatever it may be. There's just much more openness and a lot more people actively talking about, how can we engage the indigenous community more in the startup space, or how can we make sure that we the group, there's a group called the 51 that's really focused on women in tech, and how can we make sure that those 51% of the world of humans actually are represented 51% of the tech companies. So there's a lot more of that, which is really amazing to see, because the old days of middle-aged white guys running the tech industry, I think is something that we need to put as much distance as we can in the past.
Right. No, and I love that, Kevin. I think diversity in tech is something that's everybody's kind of facing with all geographies, and I think especially here, I think it's awesome that we're getting more inclusion and, like you mentioned, with all the underrepresented groups. Um, I quickly want to switch gears. I'm curious to know. Obviously, you've had a pretty successful career thus far. So, and we have lots of entrepreneurs listening, aspiring entrepreneurs as well. But what's maybe one thing that you wish you would have known when you first began kind of your path and journey?
Yeah. I was thinking about that before our conversation here today, because there's obviously a million things that you wish you knew that you could go back and redo with what you know now. But it kind of very topical. I'm in a lean stack workshop here this week. Ash Maura is running that, and it's all about lean startup methodology, or the entrepreneur method, talking to customers, trying to avoid building things that nobody wants. And I was thinking about this this morning, that you know I really wish if I could go back to the beginning, that very first startup that I jumped into after university, if I could have this, if the lean stack program, or some of the lean startup things, the work that Steve Blank and others have done, if I would have had that knowledge back when I first started out, oh, the money I could have saved building products that nobody wanted. So that's the one thing I wish that, and I think for any aspiring entrepreneurs, this innovator's mindset and really embracing lean approaches to innovation. I think of where I could have been in my career had I been working in this space, or if this sort of thinking existed 15, 20 years ago, which it didn't. It's only really been around for the last 10, but has only really become broadly adopted across kind of North America and the world in the last like 5 to 10 years.
I love that. That's a lean startup approach, creating that MVP before you build out and scale up. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Verify there's actually a problem worth solving, right? It doesn't matter if you can build the best tech out there. If no one cares about it, then don't build it. And in several of the startups that I've been involved with over my career, we built stuff that we thought everybody wanted, and it turned out they didn't.
yeah, been there, done that. So I'm curious though, when you do have your MVP and you start to see some good data coming in, what would you say, Kevin, would be the point where you should start scaling up and really pushing that forward?
Oh, that's a tricky one because I think it's different for every type of company, and even just every type of market or idea. But if I had to kind of generalize something, I think I think Steve Blank actually has a quote. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of, it's really difficult to describe product market fit, but you know it when you've got it. And I think that it's when you start talking, or when you've been talking to people and you start hearing the same big problem over and over again, and you get to the point where you've been validating with some MVPs or some landing pages, and you can just tell that this is a problem. It's a top 3 problem for your customer. They know they have the problem, they're actively looking for solutions, and they're not finding anything, and they're so excited to hear from you. That's when I think it's time, and maybe not scaling, but like to actually start building your product. And then as you continue testing and refining, when people are basically willing to give you a credit card on just the promise of a solution to their problem, that's where you start finding that product market fit, and that's where people are basically begging you to begging to give you money for your solution.
Yeah, absolutely. One question I always debate with my friends and peers about is about entrepreneurs and I guess the meaning of an entrepreneur and what makes an entrepreneur actually. And from your perspective, Kevin, would you say being an entrepreneur is something that's inherently in your DNA, or is it something that could be taught and learned, or how do you see that?
I've read a few different books on entrepreneurship, and heard different perspectives on both sides. I know for me, it's not something that I could ever turn off. So I think it must be part of my DNA somehow, because I don't think I could ever just hang up my entrepreneurial hat and say, okay, I'm just going to get a good job and just go work for somebody else for the rest of my life. I think that I've kind of tried that a couple times, not go work for somebody else, but even just work for a larger organization. And eventually, I always find after it's usually around like 3 or 4 years is where um, you know I start finding myself looking out the window, daydreaming about a new idea, or I've met somebody who had a new idea that I just can't stop thinking about, that I want to, I'm like, oh, we could scale that, we could do this, we could do that, and so I think there is something to be said about it being part of someone's DNA. But with that said, I think that it's also, we can a lot of habits, like a lot of, we can train ourselves. Like, I think people can learn entrepreneurship and learn to think like an entrepreneur, and that's when they may realize they had something as part of their DNA that they just, like an itch they hadn't scratched before. So I don't like saying you're either an entrepreneur or you're not. I don't subscribe to that, but I do subscribe to the fact that if you, I think what to me, the way I define an entrepreneur is like if you're somebody who looks at the existing status quo out in the world today and thinks, it could be better, I'm going to help make it better, or I'm going to be part of something that makes it better. That's like the fundamentals of being an entrepreneur, is just seeing a better way or seeing a problem and saying, I want to figure that out. I want to solve that.
Absolutely. I love that. Seeing a better way and having that itch to keep solving problems and trying to disrupt the status quo. But yeah, no, I totally agree. But for you, Kevin, what would you say is your unique skill that's helped you become so successful?
Yeah, that's another tough one. Introspection is not one of my top skills. Maybe that's not what you're asking though. No, I think, and I don't know if this is a typical or traditional definition of a skill, but I think that adaptability is something that has led me to where I am today. Um, I've never been a huge routine person. And like I said earlier, if I'm doing the same sort of job or doing the same sort of role, even if it's in a startup, but if it's the same thing for too long, my mind starts to wander and I just start looking for something else. I love setting up, new processes, figuring out the routine, and then handing it off to someone who can then, implement it and run and optimize that routine. And so I think, for me, I'd be lying if I said, when I graduated or when I was in my, last year of commerce, that I thought, okay, in 2020, I'm going to be a co-founder of a company called EvryWork, and, also working for a support organization. I didn't have that sort of forward thinking or forward plan. I knew I liked entrepreneurship. I liked building things. And throughout my career, I've kind of, adapted to new challenges and new opportunities that presented themselves. And so yeah, I think it's that adaptability and not being too hung up and saying, well, you know, I, I graduated with a commerce degree, so I have to be an accountant or a finance major or, marketing. I went off and took this development of information systems major that was brand new, and no one really knew where it would head, including myself. And, here I am today.
No, it's funny that you mentioned adaptability because I also feel that that's a super important trait to have as an entrepreneur or a founder or a business owner. You have to be able to pivot and adapt to navigating different circumstances. But I'm curious, what were some of the best resources along the way, Kevin, that's really helped you get to where you are today?
I think I would have to say the two things that have really helped me get to where I am today are, the my ability to, you know, I guess not ability, but just like building a network. Early on, I got into a couple different groups in that first startup that I joined in Saskatoon, where I got to meet some of the other players in the community, some of the support organizations. LinkedIn was fairly new back when I was first getting going in my career, and so I just started connecting with people and listening, hearing their stories, talking to them about what I was up to. And I think that network has really helped me. Like, I'm trying to think of the last time I actually applied for a job. It's been longer than I can remember, because usually what I found is, after the first few years of my career, it would be hearing about an opportunity through my network, or someone would reach out and say, "Hey, Kevin, I know XYZ company is looking for someone, and I heard about the job, and it sounds like something you might be interested in." Like, that's happened to me multiple times in my career. So I think building that network, and then also making sure that I keep an eye on my reputation as well. And if I commit to doing something, I do it, and also trying to make sure that I'm being mindful of not doing anything that could be reputation damaging. In especially in this hyper connected startup world that we live in, your reputation is everything. And if you're out there doing things and burning bridges and just not being sort of a very stand up person, it will get back to you. So I think that those have really helped me along the way. And another thing that kind of plays on those two is, I love using the term engineered serendipity. instead of luck, because I feel like luck is too, it's too external. It just happens. Where I feel like a lot of luck is kind of engineered. I mean, being in the right place at the right time, moving to Calgary at the time that I did, it seemed like a crazy idea because things were just starting to blow up in Saskatchewan. Things were kind of, there was the housing crunch here at the time when I moved up, and so it was like, well, is this the right time? Everyone else is moving back to Saskatoon. Maybe I should stay here. But something just felt right, and I made that leap, and it's took me off on a whole new career path that I wouldn't have gone on if I had stayed in Saskatoon. And along the way, engineered serendipity. Volunteering for certain community groups or volunteering to be a mentor or a coach with startups and other founders. Those are things that have opened up the door, and not going into it saying I'm only doing this because I want something out of it, but really just giving first. And I think that brings me back to another community group in Calgary here, Rainforest, Alberta, and their whole social contract, which is based around giving first, and good things will come. And I think that really is true. So that's I look back on many career altering moments that I've had over the years, and most of them, there was an influence of something that I had given in the past that I had no idea would come back in the future, but it did, and it helped me get to where I am today.
Well, no, that's great. I really love the engineered serendipity. You create your own luck. You can't just sit on the couch and hope to get something. So yeah, I love that. You just got to execute.
Definitely, yeah.
For entrepreneurship, even maybe startup culture, I'm curious, Kevin, what's maybe a common myth that you wish would be debunked?
When, yeah, I think that for myths that are out there, there's a few. I think the biggest one is something that we face a lot of here in Alberta, which is this kind of either or conversation when we're talking about like tech and startups versus traditional industry. A lot of times, especially when diversification is a word that's thrown around and has been a hot topic in the politics over the last few years. This myth of, well, if we divert resources, whether it's funding or even just like organizational support to help diversify the economy, it means that we're sacrificing the existing economy that we have in Alberta. And I truly believe that is a myth. I think that we can do both, and we should do both. It's not about saying, okay, the energy sector, we're just going to forget about them, and now all we're going to do is care about tech, as an example. Like, nobody's saying that. I think the myth is that we can't do both well, and I think that's been debunked in several other cities and states and even countries around the world, where you can successfully diversify to new economies and bring in new jobs and new skills into your society, and not have to sacrifice the existing in energy industry or other industries that may be prevalent in your region. And I think that if you actually do both, that's where the magic happens. The term creative destruction gets thrown around quite a bit. There's even Creative Destruction Labs that has a chapter here in Calgary, where existing industries, they innovate, right? Like, that's where we talked about earlier. When you look out as an entrepreneur, if you look at what's happening today, the status quo, and see problems and say, I'm going to fix that. Well, if there is no industry looking at or in their own backyard saying we want to fix these problems, how do you even come up with the ideas that can be the innovation game changers? So we need to support existing industries while we look at diversification, and we need to be very strategic about making sure that we're doing that together.
Absolutely. What's one question that you never get asked that you wish you would be asked, Kevin?
You gave me this question before the podcast today, and this is the one I struggled with the most, because I'm like, oh man, like, I get asked questions all the time. Um, you know, the only questions I could really think of that I wish people would ask me, because I'd love to talk more about it, is, I wish more people would say, like, Kevin, what is it that you really love about old motorbikes? And tell me more about your old motorbike. So that's one. Or, Kevin, what is your favorite crazy Elon Musk project or quote? Because big fan of Elon Musk and his big thinking. Don't get asked that enough, but you know,
Yeah.
those are all that I could come up with. I really, I guess I'm lucky and get a chance to meet so many new people in my role at Platform and with EvryWork that people are asking me questions all the time. So I couldn't think of any serious questions to share today.
That's it's always a trickier question, but yeah, I mean that is a good question though. What is your favorite Elon Musk project that he's working on? That's one entrepreneur that you hear so much about these days, and even their Tesla stock is going bananas. But yeah, what's kind of your favorite aspects of what he's doing?
Well, I think I have to give a shout out to like the mission to Mars, obviously, like colonizing another planet. And there's nothing really bigger in society today than trying to tackle that. But I think in terms of my favorite project, in terms of the way it could change lives, I'm really excited about the whole hyperloop concept, and the fact that we're actually looking at potentially a hyperloop that would connect Edmonton and Calgary. It's still a ways off. There's nothing, concrete or decided. But I actually just read something. I think it came out yesterday or today that the provincial government is on board to, move to the next phase of proof of I don't know if it's proof of concept or just consultation, but they are considering the options. And we talk about the tech sector and how can we you know as Albertans, how can we diversify, how can we create this next economy and create what's next here in the province. Imagine if you could hop on a hyperloop with a fairly low price ticket and be in Edmonton in less time than it would take me, where I live in Rocky Ridge, to commute to downtown Calgary. Like, imagine the things we could do as a united province, and stops obviously along the way in Red Deer and other towns. But I'm thinking just with the two big cities that we have, imagine all the smart minds, all the creative entrepreneurs, the designers, the engineers, the people who are building the cool new startups and building what's next. Imagine if we all of a sudden went from like these two disconnected cities of a million-ish people to being like pretty well connected, and now we're you know 2 million, 2.5 million, but united, and we're sharing our strengths, and we're able to build and grow together. I think that could be a game changer that would impact future generations for years and years to come, and kind of bring us from being a province with 2 million plus cities to being a united province with 2.5 million people that are all kind of pulling in the same direction. I think could be really cool. So that's my favorite Elon Musk project. Although he's not directly involved in Alberta, but just the whole hyperloop and the concept of that technology, could really change the future of transportation and how we even think about city building.
Absolutely. No, I'd love because I went to school in Edmonton, and those 3 hours drives from Edmonton to Calgary was brutal at best.
Yeah,
But it'd be awesome to have something to jump on to cut it down by like 90% or something.
yeah. I mean, like, even the 3.5 hours, it's close. Like, right, we're still, we at Platform Calgary, we do a ton of work with Edmonton. There's an organization called the Innovation Corridor that's helping to link and get us working together. But imagine just being able to have a friend, or you meet a new company or a business, and they're like, yeah, let's grab a coffee. Okay, well, where do you want to meet? Oh, well, I'm in Edmonton. Okay, let's book it. I can be there in half an hour. Like, or throughout your day, you could actually do, you know, rip up to Edmonton, have 2 or 3 meetings, and then back in Calgary for meetings in the afternoon. You can't really do that with the 3.5 hours, and it just makes it, not feasible. But 30 minutes or 40 minutes downtown to downtown, that would really unite the two cities. We just have to figure out how we deal with like the Flames Oilers and like that. Make sure we separate that, or the Stamps and the Eskimos. We got to figure out that as well, or whatever their new name is going to be. We need to figure out how to reconcile those differences. But in terms of startup community, or even the other communities that we have around culture, arts, all of that. Imagine if we could work together as one united um, group of people. That could be really cool.
Absolutely, yeah. At the end of the day, we're all in this together, and having something to really unite us like that would be really awesome. We only have a couple more questions for you here, Kevin. I'm curious, what's something you're proud of that maybe we haven't touched on the podcast today?
Something that I'm proud of. I think, um, uh, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, do I talk about personal? Do I talk about business and work? I think I'm really proud of the community in general here in Calgary, in terms of the startup and tech community. Over the last few months and seeing what's happened with COVID, I have seen numerous entrepreneurs whose businesses were essentially just shut down due to COVID step up and create kind of peer support groups, working to help other entrepreneurs whose businesses weren't completely shut down. We saw some Calgary startups basically offer their platform for free because they were helping. They had retail solutions and they were trying to support retail businesses, getting their products online and their business online. And I've loved to see how so many people who are going through this, like, hey, all of a sudden my revenue went to zero. What do I do? Okay, well, instead of getting angry and grumpy or just not talking, they're starting up support groups to help other entrepreneurs, or they're volunteering their time now to help entrepreneurs whose businesses weren't completely killed by COVID um, you know continue and figure out a new path. So, I just think, as Calgary in general, I think COVID has brought our community together, and not just the tech and startup community, but also, like Main Street, or like the retail and just businesses in general, looking to buy local and support local and help each other is something that. If you'd have asked me, like, how would our community behave if there was a pandemic that shut down everything, I would not have guessed that Calgary would have come together the way it had, or the way it has. And so that's something I can't say I have a huge hand in it. It's more of everybody was doing their part, but it made me really proud to be part of the community, to see some of the things that were happening, and to be involved in some of the conversations that were happening, where people were saying, like, how can we help? What can we do? And that was really cool to see.
Absolutely, and I have to second that too, Kevin. I think that was pretty remarkable stuff. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to, as we wrap up the podcast, I'm sure listeners have lots of maybe follow up questions or even want to connect with you online. But where would be the best ways for our listeners to connect with you online?
Yeah, so I'm on most of the socials, but the two best ones are probably LinkedIn or Twitter. And so on both those platforms, I was lucky enough to just get the Kevin Dahl username on both of them. So pretty easy to find me there. There are a couple other Kevin Dahls. Interestingly enough, there was a Kevin Dahl that played for the Flames years ago.
Oh,
Uh, when I first moved here, a few people kind of were looking at me funny when I met them for the first time, and they're like, well, you played for the Flames? Like, no, 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 no. Wrong Kevin Dahl, not me. But yeah, so yeah, Twitter or LinkedIn would be the best places to connect. And yeah, I'm always happy to connect. And whether it's with my platform hat on, or just with my Kevin Dahl and the community hat on, I'm always you know interested in hearing what people are doing, especially entrepreneurs. Like, I'm always willing to make time to have a conversation, hear what someone's up to, and then figure out through my network if there's an organization or a program or someone specifically that can help them. I'm always happy to make an introduction, because entrepreneurs, we gotta look out for other entrepreneurs.
yeah, gotta look out for each other. But yeah, no, I really appreciate you being on the podcast, Kevin. I'll link your profiles to the episode so our listeners could connect with you online. And I just want to end the podcast with you saying a question or a quote or a story to the audience.
Yeah, I don't have a question for the audience, but I think the quote that I would throw out there, and I know this is any Star Wars fans are going to laugh at me, but it's a Yoda quote, which is the do or do not, there is no try. I really truly believe that. Like, as an entrepreneur, or even just as somebody who's thinking about starting a business, you can sit on the sidelines, you can think about it, but until you actually take that step and you try something, you can't do it halfway. You either have to jump in or stay on the sidelines. And there's a community here that's ready to jump in and support you when you jump in. So give it a try.